I opened the door to the interrogation room. A dreary little room with a short metal table and two padded fold-out chairs. The long and bare fluorescent lights buzzed angrily in their sockets overhead, casting a clinical white light over the lone figure sitting on the chair opposite from my entrance. A young man was waiting patiently, his arms calmly and casually splayed out on the table in front of him, his tan skin standing out even more when juxtaposed over the metal. I noted that there wasn't a hint of anxiety or nervousness in him. I sat down slowly and deliberately in the chair opposite of him, plopping down two freshly opened yellow legal pads and a few pens. Just as freshly opened, every exchange we would make would be recorded. But who had the time to sit down and watch what could potentially be a multiple-hour interview? We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us carefully studying each other, almost as if we were two boxers in a ring sizing each other up before the first punch was thrown. What most of the people I interview don't know is that I am never their opponent, the other fighter standing between them and freedom. By the time I am called to visit them, the fight is already over, and their fate is sealed. I am simply the referee. He had what I presumed to be curly hair, closely cropped, almost a crew cut, but the first signs of the curls starting to show at the ends. He had a Roman nose, long, elegant, and pronounced. He was clean-shaven with the hints of a 5 o'clock shadow starting to take root. His lips were full and a lively red teeming with youth and life. A very attractive, clean-cut young man, but the ones who get away for a long time usually are. I focused on his eyes, which were a light emerald, speckled with mesmerizing golden flecks, the eyes of an exotic sultan or a wayward bandit traversing through the endless expanses of sandy dunes. Considering the circumstances of our meeting, I would have to say he reminded me more of the latter. I earnestly studied his eyes. They say the eyes are the window to the soul. But most of the windows I have seen during my interviews over the course of the years were shattered beyond repair. I have seen bloodshot eyes, crazed eyes, eyes in immense pain racked by withdrawals, and occasionally even grief and remorse, never to their countless victims, but to the injustice being served to them. His eyes were flat, so completely and utterly flat, they betrayed no emotions. The empty stare of a bovine, or the eyes of a fish on ice at a manger's stall staring dumbly and endlessly upwards as if it was locked in eternal surprise at its fate. So you might be wondering who I am or why I am here, I began, absent-mindedly running my hand through my graying hair. Are you a detective? He asked, with a voice that carried no inflection or emotion. Fitting, I thought, handsome and the strong and silent type. No, unfortunately, I am not. I never had the brains to do it. The two very aggressive gentlemen you spoke to earlier are detectives. I am what you call a profiler. A profiler, he said slowly, as if tasting the word as he pronounced it. Profiler, yes. I am asked to speak with people like you, people who do very unconventional things. From what the detectives told me in the hall, it seems you already confessed to everything. You killed those people. I killed those people, he stated in a matter-of-fact tone, not a hint of gloating or remorse or anger. He could have been stating another obvious fact like water is wet or fire is hot. I have interviewed more than a fair share who tried to put on a show of insanity, but I could count the amount of people who succeeded on one hand. This guy might actually be a nutcase. Thank you for your honesty. Makes our jobs a lot easier and your processing a lot easier as well. Now, all these other guys before me might have asked how, where, or even who you killed. I am not here to ask you those same questions. I want to ask why you did it. Why? He dumbly repeated, for the first time a flicker of emotion showing across his face. His eyes had winded in wonder, as if he had never considered this question before. And to be fair, perhaps he never had. He limply raised both his rams and gestured around the room, as if the answer was all around us to see. I did it, because I could. He let his arms drop slackly back onto the table. The bovine stare returned as flat and lifeless as ever. Truly crazy. This guy wasn't just nuts. He was the whole goddamn peanut farm. So far gone on a one-way ticket to another dimension. Sayonara. Hasta la vista. Return all mail to sender. Thank you and pretty please. All the information about the brutal slayings he had confessed to backed him up. No one had found any real trigger or rhyme and reason to his victims, which made tracking him down so difficult, not only going after the girls that looked like a previous lover who jilted him, or victims who had the mannerisms of an abusive and controlling mother. No signs of anything even remotely sexual about his crimes. Even the method of his executions followed no modus operandi, no known pattern or preferred method of dispatching those unfortunate enough to cross his path. Is there a lot of others like me? The question had caught me by surprise as I was pondering how to explain to my superiors back in Quantico that I ran into a real crazed killer. An empty report with all these needless lives lost and not even a crumb of useful data to be gained. Knowing my luck, The flight back up would be delayed just as same as the flight down to here. At least it would buy me some time to stretch the truth slightly to fill out a passable report. Beg pardon, people like me, he slowly continued, as if carefully choosing his words. I suspected it wasn't the deliberate slowness of self-preservation. Rather, it was probably the few crazed brain cells he had left working overtime to formulate the question he wanted to ask. You mean serial killers? Is that what you call people like me? Well, it's the generally accepted term, yes, so you talk to people like me. The gears in his head running hotter than ever now. But why? I decided to humor him and lean forward over the table as if letting him in on a secret. Our little secret buddy. Until the meds they force feed you over at state puts that tortured little brain of yours finally to rest for what remains of your natural-born life. Well, the people who do what you did think very differently from me or my colleagues, I began. This wasn't the first time I had to give this little spiel. I had given it countless times to curious people at bars, dinner parties, and first dates when they heard my job title. We want to know why you did it so we can try to understand how you think. We are hoping if you can help us, we can prevent others from doing what you did and get them the help they need in time. The words hung in the air between us, not even echoing in the slightest from the bare soundproof concrete walls. Do you ever get curious? Curious about what? Curious about being a monster. One of my eyebrows cocked quizzically upwards involuntarily, whether this was a whole act or not. The admission of self-awareness of his crimes would blow a hole wide open against a potential insanity defense. Why do you believe yourself to be a monster? That's what I am, right? You call me serial killer. But I really am just a monster, aren't I? He had piqued my interest. I am no psychologist, but this was something much better to put in my report than simply checking the little box at the top of my reports marked insane. Why do you think you are a monster? Because you must think you are normal, and I think I am normal. But if the world thought I was the normal one, I would be sitting where you are sitting, not here, he concluded with great effort. Bravo, bravo, for a fort there, my guy. My shoulders sagged in disappointment. Not exactly the bulletproof statement the prosecution would need to throw the insanity plea out. I leaned a little bit more heavily onto the table in defeat. You talk to monsters like me all day, not every day, or I would be demanding a better salary than what I am getting now. I joked, knowing this would go right over the crazy little head of his. Still, one had to keep himself entertained to last long on this line of work. So you walk among us monsters all day, and never considered yourself one of us. Consider myself one of you. I'm sorry, I don't really understand. Before I could even react, one of his hands darted over the table and quickly clamped onto my wrist. I almost yelped out in surprise as I tried to pull away. His grip was vice-like, and he kept my arm pinned firmly onto the table. I glanced toward the lone camera at the corner of the room, its red light blinking monotonously. Uncaringly, I prayed that the desk jockey watching the feed wasn't fast asleep. SHHH, he whispered and interlocked the fingers from his free hand into mine. I was taken aback by how soft his hands were, and warm, an almost dreamy look came over his flat eyes, the golden flecks seeming to swirl in a hypnotic way. His lids drooped halfway over them, like he was a bored child in class on the cusp of being free from the humdrum of school for winter vacation, daydreaming of hot chocolate, Christmas, and dead bodies. Remember this, he said dreamily. Still whispering, the slow and dumb speaking pattern was gone, replaced by an almost wistful tone of voice. These are the hands that killed 11 people. 11 people. The detectives had confirmed he had only a body count of 4 before alerting us. Someone was going to get written up. Look, your hands are not so different from mine. We have the same hearts pumping the same blood to our same hands. His fingers were paradoxically gentle against mine, while his other hand retained its vice-like grip on my wrist. You think you can't do what I've done. Maybe you think you're a good person. Maybe you think you don't have the same disease in you that's in me. You think you can't lift that wrench above your head and have it come crashing down. You think you can't tighten the cord as the dance for life begins. You believe you can't pick up that shovel to begin digging that grave, the first grave of many to follow. I am here to tell you that you can. A sudden momentary flash of anger sparked across his face, so brief that I couldn't even tell if it was there at all. And it's easier than you think. With this, he suddenly released his grip on my wrist. I wasn't even aware of the force with which I was pulling entire arm back during his little speech. The sudden release scooted me in the chair I was in a few inches back from the table. He who walked among the company of monsters, he said, the faraway look still in his eyes, is destined to find in him a monster. It was silent in the room for a minute, the only sound coming from the ever-angry and ever-present fluorescent lights. I had not noticed I was panting and shaking. I rubbed my eyes with both hands to regain my composure. Once I felt that I could continue, I slowly returned my hands onto the table. The same idiotic look had returned to his face. "Thank you," I finally said, gathering my unused material from the table. "And good luck to you, young man. Take care of yourself in the future." He nodded, but otherwise made no further comments. His eyes followed me as I made my hasty exit from the suffocating interview room. By the time I am posting the recounting of this story, many years had passed since this chance meeting. I had moved on to a director position after a few dozen more interviews, closing the chapter of my life that had me chasing the sickest of the sick all throughout the country. This was the only story that had kept me up at night. It was only recently that my curiosity couldn't be kept at bay much longer. I had searched through my old records to contact the prison I had run into this bandit devil. Many of the old faces had moved on, and the young man who picked up on the other end was enthusiastic and chipper, the telltale signs of a man who had just graduated from the academy and wasn't fully aware of what he had signed up for. I rattled off the time and date I had that ill-fated interview, and he took only a moment to check on the fancy new computer terminal of his. "Sorry," he had said, in a tone too saccharine for my liking. "It's not only highly improbable you had interviewed him, but impossible." The killer had been processed to a different county jail as the judge had immediately designated him a flight risk and remanded him without bail. The note on his terminal said that I had showed up a few hours late and the powers that be had transferred him before I had even set foot into that building. I asked if there were any other prisoners who were being held at roughly the same time as him. He checked, but it appears it was only nonviolent criminals who were being held at the time, probably unpaid traffic violation fines or drunks. When the transfer of information happened from paper to the new computer systems, only the ones of interest had been transferred over. That list was lost to time. Who am I to stop the march of progress? Even now, I sometimes lie awake at night and wonder if it was just a local miscreant who was sobering up playing a prank on an overworked and aging government schlep. I sometimes wonder if he was ever truly insane to begin with. No matter the words, whether it was said in jest or a darker thought from a monster, has stayed with me throughout the years. I am writing this story now because lately I have been entertaining the thoughts of the things that I possibly could do. When I am driving home late at night from the office through the long stretches of lonely highway and see a young girl thumbing for a ride. When I am in a different city, waiting for the train alone in the wee hours of the morning with only another retiree also waiting who's had probably a bit more than his usual six-pack that night. When I am hiking for my weekly exercise and cordially walk past another person in the thick wilderness and my hand subconsciously feels the outline of the survival hatchet I keep concealed for my protection. I am writing this to warn you. He who walks among the company of monsters is destined to find in himself the monster.